unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello everyone and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty. The media all need to be called out, and that's one thing we are committed to here at Souls and Liberty. They either hate authentic Christianity or know next to nothing about it, yet somehow they write articles and have all their newscasts going on as though they actually do know it. The latest hit piece, Washington Post smear of Catholicism using J.D. Vance and his conversion to the faith as the vehicle. So that article is J.D. Vance's Catholic conversion is part of the young conservative movement. Again, that's from the Washington Post. Again, the title is J.D. Vance's conversion is part of the young conservative movement, his conversion to Catholicism. Joining us today to talk about this insanity, this weirdness, is fellow Souls and Liberty contributor Stephen Wynn in Kansas City. Stephen, how you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
As usual, very good. And also fellow contributor to Souls and Liberty, Arthur Clareau, coming to us from Toronto. Hey, Arthur, how you doing?
Morning, Gary.
I'm your host, Gary Michael Voris, coming to you from Houston. All right, man, it seems innocuous from just the title. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But when you get into the semi-editorializing and they begin quoting other people, that's where the rubber hits the road. Stephen, an always reliable jumping off point when you're looking at these sorts of things is not the publication or even the story itself necessarily, but the author or the authors. In this case, Michelle Borstein and Liz Goodwin. So that's them up on the screen right now, Michelle Borstein and Liz Goodwin from the Washington Post. Stephen, what do we know about these guys?
Well, I would say, first of all, that neither has sufficient knowledge of Catholicism to be writing about it, certainly at this level. Borstein was raised Jewish. She attended the University of Wisconsin, where she studied history and journalism before going on to NYU to get a master's degree in Near Eastern Studies. She's worked as the Washington Post's religion reporter since 2006. And Goodwin, for her part, she hails from the greater Houston area. She cut her teeth at a local paper for a few years before going on to Yahoo News, where she spent 7 years working. In 2017, she moved on to the Boston Globe, spent a few years working there, and then moved on to the Washington Post in 2022. And looking at their background, nothing really in their background or in their writing indicates a real understanding, a real grasp of Catholicism. Their work instead consistently demonstrates an agenda-driven bias, as we'll discuss further here. The article in question is just more of the same. Basically, it really kind of presents a false equivalence, equating doctrine with particular interpretations of social policy. They suggest that yes, Biden and Vance are both Catholic. They just differ in the ways that they emphasize certain teachings of the church, basically, and this does not educate or inform readers. It only muddies the water further. It presents issues. It suggests that issues like the sanctity of human life, the sanctity of marriage, are on equal moral footing with issues like immigration, for example. And this just confuses the public further, including the millions and millions of poorly catechized American Catholics. It's not a good deal.
Yeah, it's interesting. You think about, are they doing this deliberately? That might be an uncharitable read on it, but they are at the very least doing it ignorantly. Excuse me, they're doing it ignorantly. And you'll find when you get into sort of the upper echelons of the liberal media, Marxist media, like Washington Post, New York Times, there's a certain hubris that comes along with many of the personalities there. Some of them are the people whose names you see, other people are the editorial staff and the people who run the show and all that behind the scenes. But there's this hubris that we sort of know everything and we can pontificate on everything and everything because we're just so damn smart. And you see and hear that all the time. When you come across an article or a story or a news piece on TV or something that you, as an individual, may happen to know an awful lot about, And you're like, wow, they don't have the size idea what the hell they're talking about here. We saw that in COVID. We see that in the election stuff. We see that in the way they cover law cases, certainly religion for all of us, certainly Catholicism. They don't know what it is they're talking about. And you wonder, are they just being hubris and exhibiting a certain degree of hubris, or are they actually trying like actively to deceive people about stuff? Arthur, let's turn to you. One way reporters who are either biased or, again, simply too ignorant of their subject matter get around all of this is they go get quotes from people they designate as experts who they either know or are told support their worldview. In this case, Liz Gooden or Michelle Borstein goes to Notre Dame, emails them, and gets quotes from two different professors.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting way of going about it. It kind of suggests that maybe they're trying to be somewhat fair and objective, but I find that more often than not, what you're facing with this sort of thing is people that are already within this particular network that want to stay within the particular network, that they're all kind of friends and buddies, or at least acquaintances, and you have to question if that is going to give you an actually objective perspective, or if this is kind of a let's all just kind of agree to get along concept. I think another interesting point on this would be the perspective of, or the official perspective of the church on some of the behaviors of people like Joe Biden or J.D. Vance, whoever you're looking at, and perhaps there's a way that the church could do a better job of clarifying these positions and holding, especially politicians and people who have incredible power and sway over the masses, to account, especially if they consider themselves Christian, Catholic, any of that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a couple of quotes actually. I'd like you to highlight them for us, and we'll talk about each one individually that they call up in the article. Borstein and Gooden call up in the article. And, they go again to Notre Dame, two different professors there. And just so people know, oftentimes when you see these quotes and, such and such of, this particular organization or whatever had this to say, there's an old habit. Reporters are lazy people. They're under deadlines, so there's always a rush to get things done. So you build up, in the old days, we used to call it a Rolodex. Today, you'd call it your contacts list if it's on your phone. And they're sort of your go-to people. You've established a relationship with them. They know you, you know them. You can just call them and say, hey, I need a quote on blah. And in 20 seconds, they'll send you a quote back. You put it in your article, and that's it. There's no deep thinking, there's no critical thinking, there's nothing that goes on like that. So you get into this sort of echo chamber idea on the part of reporters, and that's how the media works. It's not a very industrious group of people. It's people who now are just agenda driven. They go to their people. Some older viewers may remember when Father Richard McBride was the Notre Dame go-to guy. The only time that man, I had him for class, the only time that man ever wore his collar was when he was sitting on an interview, an on-camera interview for one of the major networks. Aside from that, you see him on campus. He was there when I was there my 4 years. Never saw him in a collar, taught class, never saw him in a collar. It was just, essentially a glorified t-shirt most of the time. And yet he went undermined church teaching left and right on everything. And that's why they went to him, because he followed that narrative. So Arthur, let's go back to you. Let's look at the first quote. Go ahead and read it for us, and then we'll have a little discussion about it.
So the first one here says that the church teaches that the dignity and rights of a person aren't dependent upon that person's political and citizenry status.
Yeah, Lantigua said. And okay, so right there, Lantigua is a guy at the Cushwa Center at Notre Dame. That's who the Washington Post people reported. The problem with this quote from him, or at least the way it's presented by the Washington Post, is that he makes it seem like, Lantigua at Notre Dame, makes it seem like that the political landscape is being adjusted in such a way by conservatives and MAGA patriots and whatever, that people's dignity and rights are tied to their political and citizenry status. That's just not true. It is true that the church teaches that your dignity and your rights aren't dependent on those things, but that's a straw man. Nobody's saying that. Nobody is saying that the dignity and rights of people are based on, their immigration status. Their legal status is what's determined by those things. They're not allowed in the country. It's a crime for them to be in the country. Yet this is a kind of a false way of presenting it. Again, setting up a straw man with regard to church teaching, Arthur.
I agree. Absolutely.
Do you think there is, I mean, you've been swimming in these waters for a long time. Do you think that there is an intentional, let's go out and deceive people, or they just don't know how much they don't know and they spout off like they know something?
To give some grace, I'm gonna say that maybe there's some percentage that is just an I don't know and I have to hit a deadline. Therefore, I'm just gonna go with whatever I can come up with really quickly. But when you see successive pivotal moments, take COVID, for example, where the misleading just continues, and even as evidence arises, the misleading continues. And it's almost like nothing you can say will change them from the message that they're giving, whether they're told or however they come up with that. It becomes very difficult to pretend that that is all a mistake, an accident, or just laziness. It's like the whole quote of "do not attribute to malice what can be, properly attributed to ignorance." I'm not sure that applies anymore. After a certain amount of times, or a certain successive amount of times, it starts to come across as malicious.
Yeah, it starts to come across as intentional. The other thing, I think it's interesting that they go to Notre Dame for their quotes. It's like, really? Yeah, that somehow, because Notre Dame has the veneer of being Catholic, people who went to Notre Dame and are not bought into that whole Marxist thing, like me, know that Notre Dame hasn't been a true representative of Catholicism in the public square for decades. And yet for the Washington Post to make the decision, because these are all editorial decisions. Hey, we want to get somebody to say this. Who should we talk to? Who's the expert we should go to? All those conversations happen before you, the public, sees that article. And somebody's like, oh, Notre Dame. Well, they know Notre Dame has all kinds of problems when it comes to the faith. Notre Dame has not been representative of orthodox, authentic Catholicism in decades and decades. So, do they know that? Does it hit their radar? Do they care? Did they just hear some sort of rumbling about it? It's crazy. But Arthur, this second quote, please, I'd like you to read that, and let's talk about this one for a second, because there's a lot of stuff here, and then Stephen will bring you back in on this quote as well. So Arthur, take it away on the second quote.
Absolutely. So it says the very different policy priorities of Vance and Biden, both church-going Catholics, show there's no one Catholic faith. And this is from Jeff Lehman, the head of the University of Notre Dame's political science department, and supposedly an expert on political behavior and religion.
Yeah, the fact that a few things here to talk about. First of all, shows that there's no one faith. Stephen, we sit in Mass, Catholics sit in Mass every Sunday and say, I believe in one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Here's a guy labeled as an expert, quoted in the Washington Post at Notre Dame as, again, being expert. I don't know how you become an expert in politics and religion. I mean, I don't know, did God give him a title or something that we don't know about? When we all read that, we're like, what? That's insane to suggest there's not one faith. There are many ways the faith is diverged from, and people are unfaithful, even church-going Catholics, but to put out there that this is just, it's okay to have all these multiple versions of the faith. And this is like the same song, same dance since the 1960s.
Yeah, absolutely. I think either the professor is incredibly poorly catechized. I don't even know if he's Catholic, but he certainly doesn't sound like it. He knows about as much about the faith, it sounds like, as Borstein and Goodwin. But as you say, Notre Dame has been a cesspool of unorthodoxy for decades, and so this could, simply reflect that, basically. Continuing with the theme of, intent versus ignorance, it is interesting. It's probably not wholly one or the other. I remember, I think it's probably both. I remember in 2010, very funny episode, sad but funny. I was watching Sky News out of the UK. It was Ash Wednesday, and Biden, then Vice President Biden, came out and he was giving answering questions, giving a press conference, and he had the ashes visible on his forehead, and the British host. Her name was Kay Burley, I believe. She interrupted, her own thoughts, and she verbally wondered aloud. She said, "What's that on his forehead? I mean, that strange mark on his forehead looks like he's run into a door or something." And then they continued with the story, and then a minute later, it came back to her, and she had been basically raked over the coals by the folks in the control room. Apparently, anyway, someone told her that it's Ash Wednesday, you fool, and she basically came out. She said, "I am a very bad Catholic. Of course, this is Ash Wednesday, and Joe Biden has been to mass." But it just shows even a Catholic, a UK Catholic, working in the journalism industry. She wasn't too sharp in terms of her own faith, basically, and I think there's a lot of that. Also, you got to think how secular the media is, the whole field of journalism is these days. And so, I think probably a lot of reporters, just like a lot of Americans, probably believe that because Joe Biden clutches a rosary and brandishes it in the air, and Nancy Pelosi says she prays for Donald Trump, they probably think that's good enough, that they are indeed pious Catholics, faithful Catholics, as I've seen both of them described in print. But that couldn't be farther from the truth, because they radically dissent from and undermine church teaching on fundamental issues. So I don't know. It's an interesting question, I think, but I think it's probably both. I think they really, a lot of them seize upon anything that will kind of reinforce their narrative. You remember just a few weeks into Francis's pontificate, and he came out and said, "Who am I to judge?" in terms of when he was asked a question about homosexuality. I remember CNN all but openly declared that the Pope had embraced homosexuality. He had endorsed it, not in those exact words, but boy, they seized upon that and used it to really sort of further their own perspective, their ideology, their own narrative. I think there's just a lot of that.
Yeah, I want to get your guys' input also. Arthur, switch back to you. We highlighted in the quote the word expert. That's not what it looked like in the Washington Post article. We highlighted it, made it bold, put it in brackets, the whole bit there, as you can see. This expert, this designation of expert, it's just specious, Arthur. What makes somebody an expert on politics, religion intersection?
I think in this particular regard, it's especially bizarre, because what is being conveyed is this kind of like, oh, it's a everything and it's a nothing, and these guys are completely different, but it really doesn't matter. Which it's a little bit like the experts with COVID, right? It's like when someone is an expert, what you're expecting is someone who's extraordinarily well studied in their field, someone who knows so much about this particular specialized area of society or life that they can give you clarity, because you, as someone who is not in that world, maybe don't know as much, and so you're hoping this person's going to enlighten you. So for someone to come out who is supposedly an expert and then say something so bizarre, it really does make you wonder, who are these experts and why are we leaning on them particularly? There must be others who know this world particularly better than this person, or at least can give you a better answer. So why is this the expert that we're going to? And that goes back to the intent or ignorance question, right? Like, of all the Catholics in all the world to go to, why did you
come into this gin joint?
Exactly.
Yeah, so I was curious. I mean, there's nothing to suggest at least in the article, the conveyance of this guy's expertise, that he has, he's degreed in theology. from a well-respected, well-established institution and degree. My goodness, I have a sacred theology baccalaureate from the Angelicum in Rome, the Pontifical Institute of St. Thomas Aquinas. If that dude's an expert, I certainly am. I know a lot about the faith. I know a lot about politics. I know a lot about these sorts of things. I don't know, I would dub myself an expert. I probably know more than the average bear. They should say that and be honest in that report. Stephen, the expertise that's held out, it's really meant to be kind of a silencing mechanism, isn't it?
It is, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is almost intellectually intimidating, I think, for your average reader, your average viewer, to basically stifle questions, stifle any dissent that they may have when they hear something that may not sound 100% kosher. Again, there are all kinds of quote unquote experts out there, to kind of pick your flavor of whatever narrative that you want to promote, essentially. You mentioned Father Richard McBrien at Notre Dame. Here in Kansas City, this is the home of the National Catholic Reporter. Calls itself Catholic and reporter, and it's neither really. But major avenue, major vehicle of dissent since the 1960s. And of course, the folks there, they're absolutely peddling an agenda. They present themselves as experts, but I would say that they are they know very little about the true faith.
Yeah, and it's curious here that you've got Michelle Borstein. I don't know if she's a Jewish lady who practices her Jewish faith. I don't know one way or the other. But she doesn't seem to have any credentials at all. She's the religion reporter. She doesn't seem to have any credentials at all when it comes to being able to report accurately on Catholicism. It always gets filtered through this lens or this prism or this screen of politics with her. But Joe Biden's Catholicism never gets filtered through that. He's devout. He has his rosary with him. He goes to Mass. And, again, are you just stupid? And I don't mean that as an insult to Michelle Borstein. Are you just stupid, meaning ignorant of the reality in the church today? And if you are, then you shouldn't be the religion reporter. It's just that simple. Washington Post shouldn't. But, to Arthur's point, I agree. I mean, you keep doing this over and over and over and over again. And at some point you have to, a reasonable mind has to say, wow, you're either really ignorant or there's an agenda going on here. And, you'd say the same thing for, Liz Gooden. There doesn't seem to be anything in her background to suggest that she should be able to contribute to a topic as in-depth and that needs critical approach and analysis like religion, specifically Catholicism. I mean, she's a congressional reporter. That's what her tagline is. That's what she got hired at Washington Post for a couple of years ago, to report on Congress. Well, that would mean legislation and how things happen and how you get through and what are the various alignments that are happening, what weird little, politicians are opting out to other politicians to get something accomplished in the legislative process. Well, where in the world does she get to offer some sort of expertise, at least significant contribution to an article by her, colleague, Michelle Borstein, about religion, specifically Catholicism, specifically J.D. Vance? I mean, is the umbrella thinking at the Washington Post that, she knows of J.D. Vance because he was on Capitol Hill and she reported on Capitol Hill, so therefore any single thing that J.D. Vance has anything to do with, we can get a contribution from her because she covered Capitol Hill, she covered Congress. That's just, again, the thought process seems so hampered and so nuts that it's got to be intentional. I mean, that's an article supposedly about J.D. Vance, and it certainly starts off that way. But it devolves into what is essentially a Catholics can believe whatever they want. Stephen, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a bullseye. I think it kind of reinforces the a lot of the ideas that are coming from the left inside the church today. Cafeteria Catholicism. You can pick one thing and leave behind another. It's what most of our politicians, Catholic politicians, are demonstrating in the public square. It's what most American Catholics subscribe to. 70% back gay marriage, a similar figure support abortion. The overwhelming majority, over 9 out of 10, support artificial contraception. So it's just reinforcing this idea that Catholicism is what I say it is, or what feels good to me, basically.
Yeah, nice sum up. Arthur, we'll go to you before signing off. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points here that I find very interesting. One is to Stephen's point of the kind of hollowing out of the faith to make it appeal or interchangeable with everything else in the world. It's very similar to the multicultural attempt that's been going on for a few decades now, where it's like, no, you can't have anything that is valuable or closely held or that is in any way in opposition to anything else that anyone else has. But the problem with being everything for everyone is you become nothing for no one. And that's kind of what is being moved towards. The other point here that's really interesting is that a lot of people still believe that journalism has this hard-hitting Rolling Stone style go in and really uncover who this person is and bring that out for the public. Like, I'm here for truth. I just want to dive deep, really uncover who this person is and let you all know. So we are aware as we head into the election. But whether that ever existed is to me a question, but it certainly doesn't seem to exist today. And nothing seems to be coming out without this cynical political almost like surprise hiding in the package. So something to keep in mind whenever you see these big pieces come out as well.
Yeah, whenever you're going to see a headline of somebody who's Republican or conservative Catholic or something, somewhere in that piece is going to be the attack part. All right, gents, we're going to leave it there for now, right now. Thanks for coming on. We'll see you again very soon. Before we leave you, just a little thought here. I've worked in news media almost my entire life. My professional career of over 40 years, absolutely. Many awards, including 4 Emmys, and I say that not to brag, but to establish my credentials on this topic. I know the media exceptionally well. Along these lines, please take a moment to watch just a few seconds of this.
Some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are.
As weird and creepy as J.D. Vance.
Super weird idea from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's quite weird.
What you see there is called a supercut or a mashup reel. They just put all different things together. And the context is exactly the power of the media to set a narrative.
Just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
That stuff is weird. They come across weird, and then they start being weird. Yeah, they're weird.
Being a really weird.
He's such a weirdo.
Donald Trump and his weirdo running mate are weird. Deeply and profoundly weird.
It's like the old McDonald's Big Mac song playing a million times to all. It plays sooner or later, everyone just knows it because it's drummed into their minds over and over and over and over again. They create a label that everyone can connect with, the media. And it doesn't matter if it's true or not. What matters is that it resonates, it becomes familiar, common, and people get it straight away because it's easy to understand. It's bumper stickers politics. It's just on TV.
These Republicans just being weird. It's just weird. It's really weird.
Republican weirdness goes even deeper.
He said a lot of things that are weird, a weird style that he brings, weird policies. Let's start with the weird thing, because it is a thing.
All of this has to be factored in by Team Trump and MAGA. These commie bastards still control what gets spewed into people's minds precisely because of the massive number of media outlets they have. They speak to everyone. Trump supporters speak only on social media and largely only in an echo chamber at that. Even when we win, like being correct about Biden's senility, we still don't win. The dominance of the Marxists in the media is able to keep that truth contained or dealt with in such a way that what should be huge damage is just greatly minimized. They tried to kill Trump. They committed a coup against a sitting president. But with the exception of patriots, no one else is talking about that anymore, and such is the power these offspring of Satan possess. Consider it this way. The reason the commies do it is because it works. The whole reason a mashup reel like the one we're showing you bits and pieces of can be edited together in the first place is because there actually exist this many clips to edit together from that many different outlets.
Trump and Vance are just weird, in addition to being dangerous to democracy.
It's the weird part that's the most engaging.
Whom he addressed as my beautiful Christians, which was super weird.
Weird tech bro, J.D. Vance.
He's a weird guy.
J.D. Vance, uneasy and sort of weird.
Frankly, for lack of a better word, that he's weird.
Eventually, every single American is going to see and hear that Trump Vance is weird. That's the whole reason they do it 1,000,000 times, because it penetrates into the common parlance. Now let's go to the flip side. Trump supporters on social media, because that's the only outlet they have, put together their own mashup reels, but only play them to and for each other. Sure, really good ones may get a little bit of traction here or there, but not on Main Street, where all voters hang out. The reason? It's very simple. Conservatives do not own dozens and dozens and dozens of outlets, nationally and regionally, outlets that have incredible reach with all voters. The Marxist media, despite its dwindling numbers, is still a behemoth that patriots have never figured out a sustainable answer for. They have the money, the technology, the professionalism, the passion, the production, and the outlets. There isn't anything that can be done about this in reality, at least not in the short or even near term. They have the clout, and to deny that and pretend it's not real is the road to sure defeat. Simple reality is this. These giant media outlets were first to the game. They are long established and have name recognition built in. As the saying in business goes, you don't have to be best, you just have to be first. Well, they were first. The media were infiltrated by communist ideology long before normie Americans were aware of what happened. So the commies have been able to advance their cause under the cover of journalism. And it doesn't matter that zillions of Americans say they no longer trust the media. Enough Americans still do listen to them and are subjected to the non-stop messaging bombardment born from a strict discipline by the commies. So tell me this. What is the single word, like they use weird to describe Vance and Trump? What's the single word that characterizes Harris that you hear nonstop by the millions and that it is so common that it resonates immediately with common folk? Answer, there isn't one. There are dozens, because there's no discipline, no consistent messaging, and no giant media to get it out, even if there was one, which again, there isn't. It gets watered down. Patriots must come up with a better mousetrap to offset this built-in advantage. We won't come up with one before people start voting, that's for sure, but we're going to need one soon and fast. Buying Twitter was a good start, and thank God he did, but perhaps Elon Musk can take some more billions, because that's what it's going to take, and build a rival media empire, and it will have to be an empire. Mr. Musk, we're looking your way, sir. As is the case with homicide, the Marxists have the means, the motive, and the opportunity to murder the nation. And it all begins with the media, and they have the money. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, God love you. I'm Gary Michael Voris.